All right, cool. So getting started with your design system. I think I should say before I start that after my last chat with UXZim, I asked a couple of questions in terms of the size of the teams that people are involved in and that they're working in. And so I have based my talk around that. Just a bit of a warning. So this is me. I'm Chan. My full name is Chanetsa. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a creative. Like Kim said, I work in Joburg in South Africa. I work at Absa. I'm in the Absa design office and I am the design standards manager at Absa. And I look after all the different sort of digital touch points, and my team works in defining what the standards are going to be. And so naturally, the design system also falls under my sort of jurisdiction. Absa has quite a large design team. Absa is, I think, one of the biggest banks on the continent. I think they are in 19 countries across the continent. And at the moment, within South Africa, in the design office, we have 197 designers on the team. And these include UX designers, UI designers, service designers, and process designers as well. We also have 400 plus developers that work across Android, iOS, and web. We also have a team that works on the ATMs. So they build and design for the Absa ATMs. And we have 9 large teams, and these are mostly centered around the key platforms within the bank, and over 6 large platforms. So I put large platforms there. Those are the big ones, but there are more smaller platforms that are floating around. But by these platforms, I'm referring to the mobile banking platform, the internet banking platform. We've got a sales platform. There are several internal platforms and all of that. So quite a few platforms that these teams are working on and that they are looking after. So before I sort of jump into it, I would like to ask some questions and just get an understanding of the people that we have on the call. So the first question that I have is, how large is your team? So the team that you're currently working in right now, and purely just in terms of designers. So how many designers are in your team or are in your company? Kim, I should have asked you beforehand. I'm not sure if you are able to paste that link in the chat to the poll. In presentation mode, everything kind of disappears. Right. Cool. So yes, thanks. So if you could click on the link that Kim has posted in the chat and go to the poll and just vote for whichever response is appropriate for you, so that we can get an idea of the people that we are talking to. The last time I shared, that was sometime last year. I think when I asked this question, I didn't really take a poll, but I think the average that we came up with was like 2 people. Like most of the teams had like, 2 designers that were working together. We didn't really have a lot of large teams. So let me just check the poll results. just to see. Okay. All right. Okay. So we've got one person who's in a team of 10 plus, but most of the people it's below 10, and the highest is 2 to 4. All right, cool. So I wasn't too far off. So as I'm going to be talking a lot about sort of in relation to smaller teams and not the larger teams. I think I've done the talk for the larger teams quite a lot of times. There might be a recording like floating around somewhere, but this time we're going to be talking specifically to smaller teams. So the next question, and for this one, you could just show me by clicking on the reactions. So you can click on the thumbs up reaction if you sort of agree. So the second question is, have you ever been new at a company or at a job, in a design job, and you felt completely lost and you didn't understand how the design was working? Okay, cool. I'm seeing, okay, cool. Let me try and view more people here. Okay, all right. Almost a thumbs up from everyone, almost. Some people were like, really brought their A game. They knew exactly what was what. All right, cool. Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to this. You join a company and you join a team and you're looking at stuff and you're like, what's going on here? Like I don't understand these guys. Like, who did this? You know, you're looking at this stuff and you just like, I just need to redo all of these things. This doesn't make any sense, you know? And you just want to clean up and you want to like fix everything and just like tidy it up. All right. And then next question is, have you ever had to deal with the naive newbie? So you get a new person who joins and they also want to change everything. So they come and they're like, no, we need to redesign this. We need to change this. We need to, we need to fix all of these things. And they've got so much energy and you're looking at them and you're just like, whoa, calm down, calm down. So yeah, again, quite a few people giving a thumbs up. And I think we can all relate. We've all kind of been there at some point in our careers. And then finally, have you ever had to pick up someone else's work midway? And it was just a nightmare. Like it was a nightmare. You didn't understand how they were working. You didn't understand their files. You didn't understand where to find things. You didn't understand where they used what. There didn't seem to be any sort of pattern or order or sequence in how they were designing. All right, cool. Great. I'm glad we all kind of agreed. I don't know what I would have done if everyone had said no. Sorry. All right, cool. So a quick little story. So in my previous job at Standard Bank, I had just joined the bank, and a good colleague of mine and I, we had just tidied up like all of the different components and the elements and stuff like that. And we were given a task. So we were given this login page for business banking, and they said this was done in, I don't know, 2001 or sometime ago. Could you guys work on this? Could you update this so that it matches our new designs? So we were like, this is a piece of cake. Like we helped define these new components and stuff like that. This is easy. So, we set to work and the two of us went in, we started looking at it and we're like, within a very short space of time, we had updated it. Cool. We were using the new logo. We were using the new fonts. We're using the new typeface. We used the new structure that had been defined for the login. We were using the new input fields. Great. And so on the fields, if you'll notice, there was a field for your banking username, your password, and a memorable date. So we went in and we updated this thing. We put the username, we put the password, and we put the memorable date. And as best practice dictates, for the memorable date, we put a date picker. That's like pretty like obvious and straightforward, right? Very easy for someone to input the date, and everything is going to work out well. Anyway, we redesign this thing, we push it to the developers, they build it, and it goes into production. After just 1 day in production, we get a frantic call from the call centers, and they tell us people are failing to log in. They're like, users are failing to log into their internet banking. What did you guys do? And so we were looking at this thing and we were trying to figure out, like, this doesn't make any sense. We went through it and we went through it again, and we were like, but we did everything that we were supposed to do. We didn't remove anything. We didn't change anything. We didn't break anything. We just did. But they just said, in the meantime, revert to the old version so that we can fix this thing. So we went back to the old version, and the customers were happy and things started working again. And we couldn't figure it out. We tried to search, we tried to look around, and then one key developer decided to then check previous versions of this homepage. So they went through all the archives, and they were going through the previous versions of this. And then they realized that when the page was first launched, when the platform was first launched, instead of memorable date, they had a field for a 6-digit PIN. So it wasn't a memorable date, but it was a 6-digit PIN that customers were supposed to create and they were supposed to input. But then what started happening was customers started putting their card PIN. So they would put in the PIN for their banking card in there. And so customers were getting confused. And so there was this whole debate, and they were like, no, so what do we need to do? We need some kind of unique sort of identifier for each customer to support the password. And we need it to be this PIN. It's a 6-digit PIN, but customers are getting confused. What do we do? So some really, really smart designer then thought, hey, guys, if we call it a PIN, people get confused. Why don't we just ask them to put a date? It's going to be 6 digits. We tell them what format to put it in. It's going to be 6 digits and it's going to comply. All we need is a string that has 6 digits. So instead of rebuilding this thing, we just change the label on this field and we're good to go. So they changed the label and the label became memorable date. And it was perfect. It worked like a charm, like genius idea. I wish I could have met the person who actually solved the problem. But then the problem now, what happened was customers being customers, they decided to get really smart. And they decided to start putting dates because there was no validation. They put dates that didn't exist. So their memorable date was the 30th of February. Their memorable date was the 31st of June. So those are the dates that they were using, and they would remember those dates. And when we put our date picker, they couldn't access these dates that they had created. And so they failed to log into the platforms. And that was the cause of the disaster. So after we found out, we then went back and we put it as a memorable date, and everyone was happy, and the platform was up and running. Business was happy. People could sign in, and everything went well. But one key thing that I learned from this whole experience was that it's important for us to document our design decisions. It's extremely important for us to document the decisions that we make when we are creating our designs. Because the thing is, like in this case, this is like 15 years later, some people are trying to now update, the piece of work that you did. And they have no clue, they have no context of what you did, the decisions that you've made. And it can lead to disaster, and it could lead to like an entire platform actually failing to work as it's supposed to, just because people don't understand why you made the decisions that you made, like the reasons behind it. Now, this is a bit of an extreme case, I think, and it's not really something that's going to happen, but I think at the core of it, the fact still remains that it's important for us to document our design decisions. And when we look at design systems, I think by definition, a design system is a collection of reusable components that are guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build a number of applications. And so, a design system is like a box of Lego where we take different pieces, and these pieces can be put together in different ways to build a number of different projects or digital products. But I think at its core, a design system is just a tool for us to communicate our design decisions. This is how I see it. A design system, pure and simple, is just a tool that helps us to document the decisions that we've made. And when we look at what's usually contained in a design system, we decided which colors to use. Maybe it's brand colors, or maybe the brand colors don't work, or maybe, you've defined your own colors. Maybe you were part of the team that's actually creating the platform and the brand, and you made a decision around which colors you wanted to use for that platform and what you wanted to use those different colors for. That's a decision that you've made, and it's important for you to document those decisions. Now, I know a lot of us work in small teams, and so it's not really as hectic as, say, some of us that are working in teams that have like almost 200 designers, where when a decision is made, so many people need to be aware of the decision, because you could end up with 200 different decisions from 200 different designers. And so a decision has to be made, and it has to be shared and disseminated across all of the designers and all of the teams so that everyone's on the same page. But when you are a team of one or a team of two, you might ask, but I know it. And, so I don't really need to document my decisions. I don't really need to write it down because, I remember what decision I made. But the thing is, it's not just for you. If your project grows, you will need to work with other people. And those new people, when they join the team, they need to understand the history of what happened. So we don't have that situation that I mentioned earlier, where you've got that newbie who is just like, this stuff doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what's happening here. I don't get what's going on and how all of this is working. So when new people join, when you've documented your decisions, they will understand where you've come from. They'll understand the reasons why you made some of those decisions, and they can help to apply those decisions as consistently as you've been applying them. And at the same time, you can imagine if you were to join a company where maybe the designer left, or maybe the designer got sick, or maybe it's a project that's being handed over to you midway, you would want these decisions to have been documented so that you can pick up that project and run with it and actually do a good job, and not waste half the time of the project redoing stuff that's already been done. But you can really just pick it up, read up on the documentation, and understand exactly why and what decisions were made by the previous designers. So things like what colors we decided to use and what colors we decided to use for what purpose, that's a decision that we need to document so that other people know and understand. Like, which font are we going to use, and which font styles are we going to use? Which font sizes are we going to use? Those, again, these are decisions that you make as you design, as you build a product, and you need to document these decisions so that other designers that are joining your project can also understand and get that context and get that rationale of why, these designs and these patterns are the way they are. Same as icons. So which icon set are we using? Is it one of those teams? And trust me, this happens. There are teams where someone will just go on Google and they'll search for an icon and they will just download it and then apply it to their design. Another person goes, they get one from material design. Another person goes, they get one from another icon set, and it's just a mishmash of icons and iconography styles within the same platform. So that definitely happens. So if we make a decision to use a particular type of icon or a particular set of icons, then yeah, let's share why we decided to pick these icons, and let's share the icons and say, these are the icons that we've decided to pick. We feel that they align well with our branding. They align well with our font of choice that we use on our platform, etc. You give your rationale, and someone who's joining the team can actually understand, and they won't go off and Google a random icon and just, plonk it onto their design. Also, things like our illustrations, like what do our illustrations and imagery look like? Our photography, what kind of photography do we use on our different platforms? All of that. Even things like the grid that you use, that's a decision that you make as you're doing your design. For you, you might just, sit back and go like, that looks cool. And you carry on. But the thing is, if you don't document that and actually define it, the next designer who's going to come through might do something completely different. And that's just going to cause a mess. Like if your developers don't push back, it might end up just being really messy on your platform when it's actually getting built. So things like the grid for your desktop, for mobile, for your responsive web, it needs to be defined so that that decision that you made can be understood by other people. And then obviously we've got things like components and how we style our components. Again, these are decisions that we've made. Maybe we liked, like in this case, like the really sort of big corner radius, and we're like, no, this is really cool. We really like it. It gives this feel, and it gives our brand, it gives our platform like a nice friendly feel and all of that. Great. Let's document that so that the next person understands what we've decided and why we decided it, and they can carry it on as well. And then after you've defined these things, you then go like a step further, as you go. So now you've defined the basics, you've defined the sort of the components. Then you start looking at bigger things, and you're like, how do we register new users onto our platforms? And now you're talking about bigger patterns now. So it's not just the individual components, but how all of those components come together. So if you're like Google that has the single sign-on, you're like, cool, our sign-on is going to be exactly the same across all our different platforms. If we've got 3 platforms, our sign-on is the same so that customers can understand, can recognize that this is our brand, this is how we handle our registration and our sign-in process. So you can define that, and again, you document that. You also document other patterns, like how do we introduce users to new features when we add a new feature to our platform? How do we walk our users through that new feature? So this is something that you could also document. So if this is something that actually applies to the platform that you are working on, this is also something that would be important for you to document. So these are all decisions that should be documented, but it's also going to depend on the product and the platform that you're creating. Some things are going to be more important than other things. Certain things are going to be less important. So in terms of what you should document, it's really going to depend on you. It's going to depend on your team. It's going to depend on your requirements. But just as a general outline, these are the things that I would recommend that you should document. So if we start at the top, you start by documenting your foundations. So an introduction is really just for someone who's going to be using the document. So that new designer who joins your team, It's really just for them to understand what is contained in that document, who put the document together, when was it done, and what were the reasons why all of these things were documented, just so that they can get the context of what was happening at the time. In some of these cases, it's important to highlight that certain things are temporary. It's a good thing to say, a lot of the decisions in this document were temporary because we needed to get to market at this point. So feel free to update and to improve on any solutions that you feel are not adequate or are not up to standard. You can also communicate the constraints that you were working within. You could say, for this platform, when it launched, we were using Angular. We were using Angular version 5, which had the following constraints. We could not do X, we could not do Y, and we could not do Z. And so that influenced some of the decisions that we've made. And this is going to be helpful because when someone looks at this 3-4 years into the future and they realize, hey, wait, Angular has changed since then. It now supports these things. So I can freely add these things and I can freely make these adjustments because the reason why they didn't do it before was because of a technical constraints. It wasn't a design decision, but it was actually a technical constraint that led them to that. So your introduction should sort of be like a little letter to whoever is going to be picking up that piece of work, just letting them know the context under which you're making these decisions. And then the next one are the principles. So principles are sort of they're going to be the guiding sort of light for anyone who's going to be making decisions, even for you as you make your decisions. And I've got an example which I'll share a bit later on, but these principles will sort of be the guidelines and the rules that you could use to sort of use as a check for all of the work that you will be doing and all the decisions that you'll be making. You will be checking to see if they actually align and they follow the principles that you have defined. But like I said, we'll get into a bit more detail around the principles. And then the strategy, again, this is also giving more context. If there's a very specific strategy that was being followed and that had been set out, it's important for that strategy to be communicated to say, we really wanted to sort of appeal to this segment of the market, and this is what we were trying to achieve, and this is what we were trying to change. We were trying to disrupt this and that. So the strategy that the company was sort of taking from a digital point of view that affected and influenced the decisions that you made. So if that is well spelled out and if that is available, include that as well so that there's enough context of what you were doing. So that's the first part, which is sort of your foundational stuff. And then the next part is the visual language. So these are the logos that you use. Some companies have different types of logos. And so it might be defining that this is the logo that we use just purely from a space point of view, or maybe from an aesthetic point of view. This logo mark, this particular one just looks better. It works better within a digital space, etc. So, just having that logo there and explaining how that logo is supposed to be used and how it works. You've also got colors, like we discussed earlier. If it's an existing brand that's already been defined, then maybe it's taking those brand colors and just explaining how they're used in the platform. Or if you're defining the colors from scratch, then, explain where the colors came from and how the colors are supposed to be used. And then you've also got things like your typography, like I said before, the fonts that we use and our type scale. These are the sizes, the weights, etc. that we use. And then we've got icons and imagery. Again, these are our icons. These are the photographs that we use. If you've got an image bank, these are the images that are available for you to use on this platform, or these are the illustrations that we have created that you can make use of. And then something that tends to get forgotten a lot, because it's not always necessary on other platforms, is motion. If you are working on a platform on a product that uses a lot of animation, then it's very important for you to define the rules and the guidelines around your motion, the speed, the easing, the pacing, all of that of your animations, so that they are applied consistently across your platforms. So these are sort of your visual language. These are things that are usually tied to the brand. So a lot of these will speak back to the brand. And so depending on whether or how well defined the brand you're working on is, a lot of those things should be influenced directly by how the brand has been defined. And then the next one is copy and content. So you need to define how you talk to the customers. And within the document that Kim mentioned that I will share, I've got a bit more detail, but you need to define how you are going to communicate with your customers. Again, this is also influenced by your brand. Is it like a hip, friendly brand that uses slang? Is it a very serious and formal brand? Is it a sort of informal but professional brand? Like, all of that is going to influence how you talk to your customers. If your customer manages to complete a task successfully, do you just say task was successful, or do you say, hey, right on, or do you say high fives all around? The voice and tone is going to define that. And so if you don't define that, if someone else just joins your team and they're like, man, this brand, this is just feeling a bit like too formal, let me introduce like some colloquial language in there, let me sprinkle in some slang in there, and all of that, you might end up with a platform that looks a bit like, like two completely different people, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because, in one section where you wrote, it's very formal and very serious. In the section that the new designer who just joined your team is writing, everything is all like really informal and colloquial and all of that. And it's just going to make the platform feel and sound very confused, and it's going to make it seem like it's not actually one brand. So you need to define that so that anyone who joins your team or anyone who picks up the project understands that our customer base is, we're mostly talking to CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. These are our target market. And so our language is going to be quite formal, not too serious, but definitely very formal and professional. So you need to define this so that anyone who's going to be doing any writing on your platform can understand that this is how we write for our platform. And if it's a platform for kids or youth, then you need to remind them this is a platform for youth. We try to be as informal as possible, etc. So that needs to be defined so that you've got that consistency right across. And then you've got things like grammar and formatting, just the words that you use for your different labels, the terms that you use to refer to different things. There is nothing as annoying as looking at a platform or a form and you are filling in and, it says name, and you put in your first name and your second name. And then afterwards it says second name. And then you're like, okay, why didn't you say first name in the first field? You should have just said first name and then second name, I would have known. Or when the language changes, like in one, it says home address. And then in the next one, it says domicile. And just like, pick one thing and stick to it. So those are some of the things that you would also need to just define. So as you go on the platform, define them and, say, this is how we talk to our customers. We always say home address. We always say cell phone number, or we always say mobile number. We always say, because the thing is, when that same question is asked in different ways on the same platform, the customer is definitely going to think you're referring to two different things, because you're asking that same question in two different ways. So they are going to think that a different answer is required of them. And it's also helpful to have some kind of a dictionary for your platform, especially for some of us that work in the financial industry. There are certain terms that are very technical and very specific to the industry that need to be explained just so that we can all understand and customers can understand exactly how to use those words. So we as designers understand where these words are supposed to be used and how they're supposed to be used, etc. Cool. And then the last one. So we've got the UI elements. This is a big one. It's got a lot of stuff in it. So we've got utilities. So utilities are things like your spacing. They're things like your grid. They are your strokes, your corner radius, all of those sort of nifty little details that will actually make or break a design. So all of these utilities, again, you would need to document these and to define them. And then you've got the actual components themselves. So things like buttons, input fields, selectors, pickers, all of the different components. So just having a list of these are the components that we use on our platform. This is what they look like. And so the next person who comes doesn't go like, oh, I need a button. And then they're like, yeah, let me create my own button. You're cool. Let me do my own thing. The button is already there. They can look at it and they can just make use of what you have already defined. And then very important as well are templates. So not just the components as individuals, but then you've got certain screens that are used and reused a lot. So say your summary screen, like in a transactional space, after every transaction, you get like a summary. So that summary screen, that should be a template. That's not something that someone should be designing and redesigning every single time they create a flow. It should really just be a template that they can drag from your library and they can plonk it onto the screen and they're good to go. They customize it and they're on to the next screen. Also things like your success screens or your error screens. Again, that's not something that someone should be redesigning every single time. This is something where you can just create a template. It's available and people can make use of it. So you create your templates and then you just explain where the different templates are supposed to be used. And that's it. And then we get to patterns. So these are going to be, even bigger. So things like, especially for us in the banking space, things like validation. So, when you're trying to make a payment and you receive a PIN number on over SMS, and then you see a screen where you're supposed to input your PIN, you do that and it tells you your PIN is correct, and then you continue. That's a pattern that's reused across many different transactions over and over again. There's really no need for that to be redesigned every single time. So that's a pattern that can be defined, and across your entire platform, whenever someone needs to verify that a user is who they say they are, or to verify that they have the permissions required to carry out the transaction they're about to carry out, we can just drop in that pattern from start to finish, and we don't need to redo it. It's going to make everyone's life much easier, and it's going to make that execution consistent right across the platform. So if we start applying it consistently, our customers are going to start expecting that. Our users are going to start expecting it. And when they can anticipate and expect it, and they can predict exactly how it's going to work, that means they're going to be a lot more comfortable with our system. And, for them, that sort of level of comfort, or that getting used to the system, is actually a positive thing. And that's exactly how we want them to feel when they're using our platforms. So in a nutshell, these are sort of the things that we would need to the decisions that we will need to document, so that we can remember, as we're doing our work, we can remember what we agreed on and what we discussed, 6-7 months ago, because sometimes we're the ones that actually forget. Sorry. And then it will also help, people that are going to be joining, because they will also get to understand what decisions we made and how we made those decisions. Other pieces of information that I found very useful, they're not necessarily sort of part of a traditional design system, but information that I always find people asking when they join is they always ask stuff like, how many active users do we have on this platform? You know, how many are male, how many are female, what's the age split, what are the devices that they're using, and what's the most, like how many people are active, or which month of the year do we have the most activity? So if this information is available to you, this is also like really cool information to just have on there as well, just so that someone who's designing for your platform can actually use this information to make their decisions. If they understand that 35% of your users are actually between the ages of 25 and 44, then you know the way you're going to talk to them, the way that you're going to display, the imagery that you're going to use is going to be influenced by information like that. The devices that are being used, if it's a native app, then you know if you don't have any iOS users, then you can focus on Android, or if you do have more iOS users, you know you can focus on that, etc. It's always good to have this information so that you understand and know who you are designing for. So again, it's really important. It'll be great for us to document all of this information. It will make it much easier for you when you are handing over a project, or when you're leaving the job and you're handing the job over to someone else. It is also going to make it so much easier for you to communicate with the developers. And trust me, they will love you for it when you have all of your stuff documented, when you've got all your components documented and the usage guidelines, the different states, all of that. When you have that well documented, it's just going to make the developers' lives much, much easier. When you have things like, you know, your illustrations, your assets, your icons, everything well documented, that means they can just create a repository that has all of these things, and they can quickly pull them into their application when as they're building it. So this is going to make your communication with your developers much easier as well. And the thing is, once you have documented a particular decision that you've made, the next person who's going to come through and they're facing a certain problem, they're going to go through the documentation. They will see something that you documented, a solution that you created. If we go back to our memorable date solution, that could become a pattern that we use in future, because someone who did it documented it, and so it's available for us. We actually know about it, and we can now apply that to a similar problem when we encounter it, and it can become a pattern that we use. And the thing is, working this way, and this is really important, it helps us to think and work in terms of systems. So we don't think about things as individual sort of elements anymore. When we're looking at spacing, it's no longer just looking at, you know, this button in this input field, how am I going to space them? But once we start defining spacing as a whole, as an entire system of spacing, then, you know, the way we think about it and the way we approach it is going to be completely different than, you know, when you're just focusing on a particular screen and a particular layout. When we start thinking about how these decisions will be applied across multiple screens and across multiple products, we start thinking in terms of systems and how these things can actually be applied across. So if we say decide to change something, if we decide to change, you know, if we decide to change our input fields, for instance, you know, we will then need to ask ourselves, so how is that going to affect our date pickers? How is that going to affect our drop downs? How is that going to affect, you know, our forms? How are our forms going to look? Is this going to make our forms longer, or is it going to make our forms shorter? So we start thinking of the entire system and not just that specific component that we are creating or we are building for. Because once we work in this way, when we make changes, you know, these changes affect other things and other elements as well. And again, when we're thinking in terms of systems from a from a technical point of view, in terms of like coding, it's going to be much, much more efficient for the developers to actually build platforms and put stuff together, because once they define these rules within code, it's going to be much easier for them to start to build the platforms. It's also a great way to record value. So when you've been documenting these, these decisions that you've been making, it's also a really great way for when you're having discussions with your bosses, with your stakeholders. It's a good way for you to actually show exactly the thinking that goes behind some of the decisions that you make. Because when someone looks at the end result and they're looking at just the design, they're looking at a login screen or they're looking at an error screen, to them, they're like, okay, cool, you've got like a little icon there and an illustration and you've got like a button there, cool. But when you have documented these things and you're giving the rationale and you're explaining the whys and the hows, then it's going to show the value. It's going to show a lot more value that you are bringing. It's really just explaining that value that you're bringing. And so, when you give this, you're about to have that discussion with your boss about getting a raise, and, they're asking you, why you feel you need a raise, or, what value you feel you have brought to the team, and all of that. You can pull this out and you can explain and you can take them through all of the work that you've done, all the decisions that you've made, the reasoning that you've gone through, and all of this, and also explaining to them that this is actually future-proofing the platform. The next person who joins is going to be able to pick this up and they'll be able to continue running with it, consistently. So it enables you to actually show the value that you're bringing. All right, cool. So I think we can take a break. I don't know if there's anyone who's got any questions or any comments while we take a break.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, cool. All right, so okay, I wanted to make a comment concerning the little story that you gave us about when you guys changed I think, was it the front page or the login page, and there was an issue of the date picker, etc. So I know when it comes to design systems or generally with users, there's this thing called interaction patterns that users end up developing if they get used to a certain thing. And when you change that, or if you don't accommodate that when you're now coming up with a new system, it'll, I guess, cause problems, because people have been using this thing even though it wasn't super efficient for a while, and if you now suddenly change it, it'll cause problems. So does it mean that even when you're now updating or coming up with a new design system, you also always have to take into account what what behaviors of users are acclimated towards? Even if, let's say, the thing wasn't that well designed, but they managed to think okay, this makes sense, this is how we. So you always have to think about what they have acclimated towards before you start coming up with new fancy design system. Is that usually the thought process?
Yeah, so I actually there's a time when I spoke at it's called the Design Hub, and I remember we said, even if it's bad, then let it be consistently bad. It's not always good advice, but there are some instances when we have had to do that. We've had to make certain compromises where people are used to something that we feel is not great. It also happens a lot with language. Especially in banking, we use a lot of terminology that people don't actually understand, but now they're actually used to that terminology and we can't change it anymore because, as complex as it is, people are already used to it. But then at the same time, there are certain things and certain behaviors that would pose, like if they pose some kind of risk, or if it's not really in the best interest of the users for us to carry on with those patterns, then we will try and phase in the new solution and maybe talk about the benefits, or explain why we are moving to like a new like a new way of doing things which they are not used to. So it's really one of those things where you kind of need to play it by the ear. Like, you assess based on the situation. Sometimes you need to push for change, and sometimes you accept and you just keep the old way of doing things.
Kimberly, did you still have a question?
So Chan, you shared a diagram that broke down all the elements of a design system. So I run a small team, 3 members, and we want to deliver a good design system to the client. So my question is in 2 parts. First of all, what's the best approach to take in order to deliver a quality design system? And also, when is the right time to start working on it? Is it right after your low fidelity screens and then you're now transitioning to mid or high fidelity and then you start working on the design system? Or do you work on the whole app and then combine all the components at the end? I always struggle with that.
All right. So I'm going to sort of get into sort of the levels of fidelity that you can go into with your design system, depending on your product and depending on your team. But for me, for every project that I've worked on, as you define your design, that sort of happens concurrently with your design system. So once you've sort of come up with your colors that you're going to be using on your platform, you already go and you define these are the colors that we're going to use. Yes, you might sort of change your mind as you start creating and building the platform and you start adding more screens and features. You might realize that one of the colors is not working well. You can always go back and update that color in your design system to reflect the new one that you've picked. And once you've got like an input field that you're happy with and it's different states, then that's it. You define it and it's done. If you need to change it, if you need to make any updates to it, you can always go back if it's not working or if you need to make adjustments as you go, but you go back and you adjust it right from the central place, and then you come back to the work that you're doing. I just think the best way for this to happen is for everything to happen concurrently. As you make the decisions, you set aside all of the different components, colors, styles, whatever you've decided on, you set it aside. It's already defined.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome. Jyrmid?
Cool.
I see you have a question.
Yeah, great talk. Really appreciate it. I have 2 questions, Jan. Got them written down. Where do you document? Is it in Figma or in Zero Height or Excel, or what do you use? That's the first question. And how do you balance documentation with production if you alone are responsible for building the design system and documenting it?
Cool. So I've actually got a slide right at the end that has the sort of low fidelity places for documenting. And then if you've got the budget, the other tools and platforms that are available for you. And I think in terms of balancing, when I say documentation, I think maybe let me just explain that your first go doesn't have to be extremely like detailed. It doesn't have to be like well crafted and well written. In many cases, it could literally just be bullet points to say, this particular component, like for instance, we have a component called an account picker. So you just write in bullet points, account, like user uses it to select account. When a user clicks on it, it displays a list of all available accounts. with default account pre-selected, and you can have the different states of, when it's in focus, etc. So it doesn't need to be like hectically detailed, but just a few key pieces of information that will be important for you to remember or for someone who's using the component to know. So in some cases, I would say level 1 of your documentation will be just having the thing somewhere and just saying, this is the date picker, or this is the account picker, the account selector. That would be level 1 of your documentation. And as a start, I think that's good enough. If someone were to join and they're looking for a date picker, they will find it. They might not understand why you made it that way, but they will know that this is the date picker and they can actually pick it up and use it. And then level 2 would be like, just bullet points explaining and giving a bit of info. And then level 3 would be like fully fledged documentation where you've got your, test results if you tested it and all of that, like fine detail that you might have available.
Excellent. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So I think we can carry on. I'm just going to go through this next part very quickly. I think it's pretty. Oh, Joe Chen has a question. Yes, Joe.
Okay. So you have to forgive me. I've got my 1-year-old son with me here, busy playing. So I'll try to be as quick as possible. So mainly, I'm not a UX designer. Mainly, I'm a graphic designer, working with flyers, posters, and so on. So how best can I employ these design systems? Because we are just the two of us, me and my other mate. How best can we employ this design system in that scenario? Because mainly I've noticed you are talking to the user interface designers, but me as a general graphic designer, how best can I use it?
Okay. So I think this is going to depend on whether you are working on one particular brand or you are working on multiple brands each time. If you are, say, working on flyers and like logos and stuff for different customers, then I guess would you could apply it in terms of like for branding, you could apply it in terms of creating like a style guide for your clients, so they understand how their brand works and the decisions that you made on their behalf. But if you are doing like posters, flyers for different clients each time, I don't know if there would be a real benefit to you sort of creating a design system or working within that way. But if, say, you've got a consistent client that you're constantly doing work for, then it will be very helpful for you to do that. You could have just apply the same principles and the same structures and create your templates for your newspaper ads, for magazine ads, for billboards, for posters. You've got the logos, everything already sort of pre-positioned in the right places and all of that for that particular client. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I have about a couple more clients that I consistently do work for.
All right.
That would really work.
All right, cool. All right, so how do you start? So you are in a team, you are working, and I think the way that I've sort of described initially, it's kind of like, you're starting a project fresh and you start defining these things like I said to Wadzanai. But in a lot of cases, I think many of us are in a situation where you arrive at a company or you pick up a project, it's already existing, decisions were already made, stuff is already out there, it's available. So where do you start then? And I think the first place to start would be just to understand the entire world and pick a starting point. If it's just one platform that you're working on, I think that's pretty straightforward. You can just start from that platform. But if you've joined a company that has many different platforms and so on, you just need to understand which place would be the best for you to start. In some cases, it's better to start with smaller platforms that won't cause a lot of sort of like disturbance or interruption, because you are about to change the way that people are working and people have been working. And so you might want to pick a smaller platform and start from there. But in some cases, you might actually, if there's support and appetite, you might want to actually pick one of the bigger platforms or one of the main platforms and say, let's start here with this platform. It needs a lot of love. It needs a lot of like consistency and rules and guidelines and so on. So let's start with this platform. It's really going to depend on your environment. In some companies, there's politics as to who owns the platform, and maybe the person who owns that platform is very precious about it. So maybe don't start there. You start with a platform where the product owner is maybe a bit more open-minded. So just understand the lay of the land and then pick one platform that you're going to start from. And then the second one is bring others into the process, especially your developers. I think one of the mistakes that I made when I started off in this field is I spoke to all the designers. We made all the decisions and we were happy. We were high-fiving each other. We're doing such a great job. And then when I went and told the developers and showed them what we'd done, they pushed back on a lot of the decisions that we had made, because from their point of view, they wouldn't work and they would make life difficult for them. And so I learned there that you need to talk to other people, talk to all the stakeholders, talk to the developers, talk to the product owners, talk to, the different people in the team, and just make sure that they understand what you're trying to do, and you get their buy-in. They're not always going to buy in, but at least, tell them what you're about to do and give them the reasons why you're taking that journey, and just explain the benefits that will come with that as well. So it's important to bring others into the process. And then the third one is create and document your goals and your principles. It's really important, even just for yourself, to outline your goals, to say, this is what I would like to achieve, or this is what we would like to achieve with this exercise. And so that you sort of don't lose focus of what you're trying to do. If it's just one platform, if you're going to start by just looking at the design language, then you want to focus on that. If you want to fix the components as a start, then outline all your goals, and then you can tick them off as you go one by one. It's just important for you to define a scope for yourself, so that you've got something to measure your progress against. And then the principles are also very important because they help you to make decisions. And we'll look at some of the examples of principles, but you need principles that will guide you in terms of your design. What is your platform supposed to do? What are you trying to achieve with your design? Are you trying to simplify it? Are you trying to make it more personal? Are you trying to make it more complicated, maybe for the particular user base that you're looking at? It's important for you to have these principles that then help you make the decisions. Because if you are trying to simplify your platform, if one of your principles that you've set out is simplicity across all your platforms, then you look at a screen and you say, this is too complicated, this is too complex, I still need to simplify it. When you create a component, you need to then say, am I simplifying this component, or am I actually making it more complex? So your principles are going to guide you in making the decisions as you start to build your design system. And then the fourth one is to consolidate what you already have. So look at your platform, look at what you already have. And this goes back to your point, John Banda. Consolidate what you already have. So you look at what is already existing. You do some sort of audit, and this is something that I've had to do several times, where You go through a platform, you look at all the different buttons, you look at all the different input fields, you look at the language, you look at how we talk to our customers, you look at your forms, you look at your success and the error screens. So you do an audit of what is already existing. And once you've collected all the things that are existing, you then consolidate it and say, okay, we've got 50 different types of buttons, but going forward, these are going to be the buttons that we're going to use, because they're flexible, because they give us the different options that we need for all the different use cases, etc., etc. So you say, okay, cool. So now we're doing away with all of those different buttons. These are the buttons that we're going to be using going forward. You look at your language, you look at your icons, you'd say we're using 10 different types of icons across our platform. We are going to pick an icon set, and this is going to be the one we will use going forward. Whether it's one that you are getting from elsewhere that's been created by someone else, or if you decide to create your own, if you've got the time and resources, but consolidate and, come up with a single way of doing things where you've got like multiple solutions. And then once you have consolidated all of these things, then you give them names, and you need to give them names that work, that are consistent right across. This helps a ton with talking to developers, especially. I remember one time a designer said to the developer, add a stepper onto the screen, and the developer, it was an iOS developer, and he said, why do you want a stepper on the screen? And the designer's like, just add the stepper. We need to have the stepper on that screen. And then when they were looking at the piece of work, they realized the developer had put in, there's a field that has a plus on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, and a minus on the left-hand side. When you click the plus, the number goes up. When you click the minus, the number goes down. Technically, that's a stepper. But what the designer was referring to was a sort of like a step or progress indicator that's used at the top of the screen to show that you are in step 1 of 2, you're in step 2 of 3, and so on. So you need to name your components and give them names that everyone will align with and that everyone will recognize. And if you're working on iOS or Android or web, I've got the websites down there where you can actually get the technical names of a lot of these components that we have. And then if you've got custom components that you've created, then you've got the freedom to, give them your own names that you come up with. But ideally, pick the standard names that they are called. It's just going to make communicating with other people a lot easier. Cool. And then, so after you've done that, now you've consolidated your different elements, you've given them names. Now you need to decide how things are updated, how things are deprecated, and how things are replaced. Because the thing is, once you have come up with something, especially, in the digital field, things change. Stuff changes all the time. So you need to decide, when do we actually change it? When we do need to change a component or a pattern or a template, like when is that point when we need to change it? Who makes the decision to say that a component can or should be changed? Do we just change because we don't like it, or we don't feel like it, or I saw something on Dribbble that looks really cool and I want to try that now? What's the criteria that we use when we are changing and updating our components? Again, this is going to differ on your platform. It's going to differ on how big it is. If it's a smaller platform, you're pretty agile. You'll be able to sort of update stuff as and when you need to. But when you're working on larger platforms with more people, then it's not advisable to change too often. And again, back to John Banda's point, users are already used to a certain way of doing things. Sometimes you don't want to consistently be changing stuff. Every time I go to a website, it's looking different. That's also not great. So you really need to understand when and how stuff is supposed to be changed. And then the last point is keeping the team informed. So when those changes do happen, when a new decision is made, when a new component is created, you know, you just pop an email to your team if you're using Slack at your place, or if you're using Teams, you know, just a message in the Teams group to say, hey, we've updated the input field. The focus state is now changed. It's now going to look like this. We've changed this. This has been updated, just so that everyone is on the same page and everyone knows exactly what's going on. So you need to be constantly communicating with your team and keeping them informed of what's going on. Right, cool. I see Kim. You say, since you work in a big team, do you have 3 design systems for iOS, Android, and web, or 1 design system suffices? So we have 1 design system. We have 1 design system, and that 1 design system has a single sort of core set of styles. We have a single set of principles, but the way those principles are applied on Android and iOS and web will differ. So the executions might differ depending on the platform, but at their core, they're going to be the same. Android has its own way of notifying users, and like, you know, Android uses snack bars, you know, the little ones that pop from the bottom of the screen. iOS typically uses toasts that pop from the top of the screen. So those are there will be 2 different executions of like giving a user feedback. But still they will both fall under, say, user feedback. They will also be documented separately. For, you know, a toast and a snack bar, they will be documented separately, but the 2 are always going to be linked and related. So we've got 1 design system, and we will typically say, for a date picker, I think a date picker is a great one. So we will say the date picker, we'll explain what the date picker is. We explain how the date picker is supposed to be used and why we use a date picker. And then we'll say, here's the iOS version of a date picker. Here's the Android version of a date picker. And here's the web version of a date picker. So that's how we tackle that. And yes, we have a dedicated team of content writers, and sort of naturally the head of content will fall under sort of the design system team. So the head of content, who kind of defines the way that the content team works and happens and all of that, by default, they work on the design system. It's their responsibility to look after the content section of the design system. Cool. All right. So in terms of the tools, so you can start very low fidelity, especially if it's 1 person or if it's just 2 people in your team. You can use these tools. They all have a free version, I think maybe except Office 365. But the reason why I have it on there is because most companies have like an Office 365 license of some sort. So you can use Google Docs. It's easy to share. Everyone's got like a Gmail account, and you can share documents. You can share folders on Google Drive. You can have all your different sort of types of documentation there, and you can easily use that platform to share your documentation. That's very low fidelity. It's something that you can have up and running like within, just a day. You can also use Notion. Notion is really cool. I love using Notion, and Notion it already has templates for design systems. So you can download a free template for setting up your design system on Notion, and you can actually put your documentation in there. I think you can give read-only access to other people. So you can give read-only access to other people on Notion, and you can create like a web view of your documentation where there's a URL that other people can visit. And so that could be the URL for your design system. So Notion is also a pretty good tool. Like I said, Office 365, you can just use a Word document that is online in the cloud that you can share with multiple people, and it can be updated from there. You can also use Dropbox Paper, works very similar to Google Docs. There's a free version, so you don't really need to pay for that. And then a lot of companies have Confluence, so you can use Confluence. I personally found it a bit restrictive, but you can use Confluence. You can also get like a free account on Confluence if you would like. So these tools that we have on here are all free, and you can use any one of those for kicking off your design system and housing your documentation. And then if there's a bit of budget, then you can use any one of these different tools. So there's Storybook, although Storybook is more sort of dev leaning. It's more for documenting code for the developers. But you could use that, and sometimes you can use that in combination with another tool. So you could be using a Word document and then using Storybook, or you could be using Google Docs and Storybook, etc. So you can kind of mix and match them. You can also use Zero Height. I believe Zero Height has a free version, but I think it limits the number of things that you can document on there. There's also the DSM from InVision. It's pretty cool. It works really well. It integrates very well with Sketch. I haven't tried DSM with Figma, I actually come to think of it. But it's got some really good integrations. If you can afford the license, then you could give that a try as well. Then there's Frontify and Supernova. These are pretty new, or I found out about them like quite recently. I haven't actually tested them hands-on, so I can't really give you any kind of review on there, but these are platforms that exist that you could try out. I'm sure all of them have like a free trial that you can try. And then Lingo is also pretty good. I used the first version of Lingo when it came out. It's by the Noun Project. I used the first version when it came out. But I think it had some like limitations that we couldn't live with. So we had to dump it and move on. And then obviously, if you've got the budget and you've got a large enough team, then you can create something custom, which is what a lot of the bigger companies and bigger teams do, because the teams, there are a lot of like very specifics that you need to work around, and so you could build your own custom one, but there's a maintenance cost that comes with that, and you might, if you can't support it and maintain it, then you might want to avoid that. The other platforms will be better. All right, cool. Now I've put together this sort of template that you could use. I'm going to share this template, and it just walks through all of the things that we've spoken about. So things like the foundation, so your introduction, the principles. I've got some examples from the Lightning Design System from Salesforce. These are examples of their principles, like around the visual language, around how you could document your color, around your typography, around your iconography, your illustrations, photography, etc. Voice and tone for your content, your grammar and formatting. These are just examples, like examples that I've put together just so you get an idea of what information you could put there. Templates and patterns for things like components and your templates and patterns. You'll see that I would recommend that you just keep all of that stuff in Figma, in Sketch, or Adobe XD, whatever tool you use for doing your designs. I would just recommend that you keep components in there. It's going to be a lot of work for you to be copying and pasting components in say your Google Doc. It's going to be a lot of work. Rather just point people to where the library is, and they can find it there. If, however, you do have the time and you do have the resources, then you could bring all your imagery and export it from Figma, or you can use some of the plugins to actually pull all of your documentation onto one of these platforms that we've spoken about. I know DSM has a plugin. I'm not sure about Zero Height and the other ones, but I know there's a plugin where you can actually just pull your components from your library onto the platform. And then for your what you call it, for your components, I've also got like an outline of how you can, like a very detailed outline of how to document your components, like the overview, the description, context of use, the rules and the guidelines, the copy, the behavior and motion, etc. This would be very detailed, so you can remove any stuff that you feel is not necessary for you and your team, and you can just work with the info that you feel is going to be important to you. All right, cool. That is it.
Amazing.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I think there's one in the chat there from William.
Oh, yes. How do you balance having a design system and being creative? Most designers tend to feel constrained or put in a box. So I actually have a talk. I did another talk at World Class Design Conference last year about this very topic. And I think, in a lot of cases, like there are multiple answers to this, depending on the project and the product that you are working on. Sometimes, and I'm going to be brutally honest, sometimes some of these platforms are not really the place for you to show off your creativity. You are trying to solve a customer problem. So especially if you're working in finance, if you're working in insurance, if you're working in, you're working for a utilities company that needs to, people need to buy electricity or buy, tokens or recharge their phones. A lot of them are not looking for creativity, but they're looking for something that is functional and something that is going to allow them to complete their tasks. And so that should be your main focus, to say, does this actually help people in completing their tasks? But then at the same time, I think back to the point where I mentioned sort of deciding how stuff is updated and changed. The design system should always have space for change. You should always, it's a living thing, and so you should always be open to updating things when they're getting outdated. You should always be open to improving on what you already have, but it needs to be an improvement, and it shouldn't really just be, oh, because I saw this really cool thing on Dribbble that looks cool. It's the latest trend that everyone is doing, so let's jump on board and let's do the same thing. It needs to be justified. So there needs to be some justification behind the decision that you are making to actually update the design system.
I've got a question, Chan. In your lo-fi options for a design system, would you not just use Figma, or would you recommend against that? Just use Figma for everything?
You could definitely use Figma. And I know of quite a few teams that are using Figma. So if Figma is the tool that you are using, then you could definitely use Figma. I think Figma does get tricky when it comes to some of the access, like access restrictions, depending on how your account is structured. So we have used Figma, but for us, the way that our account is structured, it makes it really difficult for us to use Figma as like that one central place where all of the stuff is, because I think when you're on an enterprise license, every person who accesses it sort of gets billed. So you also try and like keep that number to a minimum. But if it's like if you are on a smaller account, I think you can just share and give people read access only. And so, yeah, that would totally be an option if you're already using Figma as your design tool.
Awesome.
I'm also not sure. I'm not sure about Sketch Cloud. The last time I used Sketch Cloud, I think you could also do that with Sketch Cloud. You could also just share a link, and as long as someone had a Sketch license, they would be able to get either read or write or edit access to your file.
Awesome. I see Jyrmid's got a question there. What's your favorite design system?
Oh, that's a tricky one. It has definitely evolved. I think right in the beginning, it was like Salesforce, the Lightning, like in the earlier days. I think they had the most comprehensive design system at that point. But it's kind of fallen behind a little bit. I would say for now, Shopify is probably the design system that I look at and reference a lot, because I think the problems that Shopify is solving are very similar to the problems that we're also solving at work. Like the different layers that they have to work through are quite similar to ours. And so we can actually like borrow a lot of the solutions that they have. They're also designing for 3 different platforms, web and iOS and Android. And they've split out their design system really well to show how, you know, the different platforms are affected and so on. So Kim, to your point, you can take a look at the Polaris design system that Jyrmid has just shared, because they managed to house, you know, the solutions for the 3 platforms in one design system. So yeah, I would say Shopify, I would say Polaris, because it's the closest to the problems that we are trying to solve as well. So we can learn a lot from them.
That's awesome. There's a question from Sandra.
All right. What would you recommend for beginning in terms of selecting certain items like font and icons, etc.? So I would say when it comes to your fonts, a lot of it is going to depend on your brand. So it's going to depend on the brand that you are trying to, or the brand that you are building on top of. You would want a font that complements your brand. Some brands already have their own custom fonts or typefaces that they have selected or even created specifically for them. And so you could use that specific one. So you can use that font that your brand has defined. But there are some fonts that don't work well in a digital space. I've been in a couple of companies where the corporate font doesn't work well in a digital space. There are quite a lot of issues in terms of like how they define the, what do you call it, the box that the type sits in. If you look at how Apple and how Google have designed their fonts, you'll see that they sit well and the text sits right in the center, etc. So you would need to consider that. You would need to look at whether the font aligns with your brand or not, and whether the font works well in a digital space or not. And then when it comes to iconography, you also want icons that also reflect your brand. So if you've got like a very formal and kind of rigid brand, then you would also need to have icons and iconography that reflect your brand. If your brand is playful and it's young and kind of like, you know, very cheerful and informal, then you can get a font, an icon style that goes with that. So it's really going to be defined by your brand, but it's also going to be defined by how it works on a digital space and how legible your fonts and your icons are within the digital space. So unfortunately, my answer is nothing specific. It's like there's a lot, But there are quite a few articles that I've gone through that you can, I'll see if I can share, but there are quite a few articles that, you know, have recommendations around how to pick like the best font and how to pick the best iconography for your platform.
You kind of mentioned that the devs, you got a bit of resistance from the devs because you didn't kind of include them one of the first times when you're building a design system. What other examples of resistance have you had to trying to do this kind of work that people might be able to like look out for when they try to do it?
So I think two fronts to definitely look out for. So it's from the developers. You just need to understand like their constraints, the way they're working, frameworks they're using, etc. And then the second one is brand. The second one is the brand team, especially if it's an organization that has a very strong brand team. So like the example that I gave where the brand font wasn't actually designed for digital use. So it didn't work really well. And so we then went to brand and we said, we can't use this font in the digital space. We have to use another font that works well. But we found a font that is kind of similar in, you know, like in style and structure and stuff like that, but we can't use our, and there was a lot of pushback because then it's like, no, this is our corporate font. We have to use it, etc. And then our developers had to build like a demo and actually show how the text went all out of whack. And then we switched to the other font we were recommending, and they would see how everything was like well aligned and so on. So you really kind of need to, you know, be good friends with the brand team, especially for the larger organizations that have like the more influential brand teams. You really need to work well with them, just explaining your decisions. I think there was another case as well when we were building a share trading platform, and the brand had selected a shade of green, which was like a minty, sort of like pale green. And for red, they had said, no, we don't want like outright red. We want it to be like a slight pinkish color. Red is too strong, and, you know, and so we used those colors on the share trading platform, and customers just complained, and they're like, is the share up or is it not up? If it's up, the share price is up. I want it to be green, like a nice, solid, hard green. And if it's down, it should be red, you know, not this pink. And we had this sort of discussion with the brand team before, but when customers started giving their input when we were testing, then, you know, they took that feedback and they were like, okay, we will allow you to use different colors for the digital platforms. We now understand. Yeah.
That's awesome. And you mentioned something about like who can change the design system. How does that work in different size organizations? It's free for all in small organizations, and then like the bigger you get, is there like some kind of approval system that you have at the bank? Or
yes, there has to be an approval system, and it is multi-step, and you get several people that will sort of review and make the decision. So it's not up to one person and their opinion, and it's also not up to one person, you know, if they're at home sick, you know, then the decision is not made. So it's several people, several key people that make that decision. But then at the same time, for any change to be made, it needs to also pass through a number of steps. So you need to give the rationale, you need to explain why that change is necessary, and also whether it's just a change, like an adjustment to an existing component, a complete rewrite of a component, like a complete redesign, or, you know, depending on the scale. There are some things where someone could just go, the icon is interfering with the text when we go beyond 50 characters. It interferes with the text. So could we make this line wrap? You know, that's a small change that one person can even make the decision to just say, okay, cool, that's standard, that's straightforward, that's a usability issue. Yeah, you know, and then that change is approved and it goes through. But if someone wants to completely redesign and rewrite the date picker, then there has to be quite some good explanation and rationale as to why can we not use the previous one that we're using? You know, what necessitates such a large change?
Awesome. All right. Well, it's getting late. Yeah, I see Kim dropping hints. Thanks so much, Chan, and thank you everyone for joining. We'll share the recording of this and also all the links that have been shared here, and Chan's your document. We'll share that with everyone. For those of you who aren't following us, we've got a LinkedIn group where you can sort of follow us for updates or follow the Eventbrite, our Eventbrite account. Or if you aren't in the UXZim WhatsApp group and you'd like to join, just message Kimberly or myself and we'll add you. Our next talk is on May the 4th, and it's going to be on accessibility. So that'll be a good one to join for also. Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chan. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for all the kind messages. Really appreciate it.